My son came back for his children after 15 years. And he doesn't understand that I've been preparing for this day since the moment his car tires chirped around the corner of my street, vanishing from my sight. The naive fool. The afternoon sun, warm and golden, usually paints my small porch in a comforting glow. It's my favorite spot. From here, I watch my world unfold. Right now, my grandkids, all 5 of them, are scattered across the backyard, a chaotic symphony of youth. Emma, the oldest, 20 now, is trying to patiently teach little Sophia, 15, a new guitar chord, her brow furrowed in concentration. Jake, 18, and the twins, Olivia and Noah, 17, are wrestling over a frisbee near the old oak, their shouts echoing with the easy joy of innocence. This is my everything. My late wife, Cindy, God rest her soul, she always said these kids were our second chance, our redemption. And she was right. A sudden glint of chrome caught my eye. A black Mercedes, sleek and far too expensive for this part of town, turned onto our quiet street. It moved with an arrogant confidence, slowing as it approached my house. My breath hitched. It was like a cold hand had just squeezed my heart, a premonition I'd learned to trust over 60-odd years of living. Years spent building things, fixing things, and at times breaking things if it meant protecting what was mine. The car stopped. The tinted window slid down, and there he was. Daniel, my son, 15 years. He looked successful, too successful. His suit was sharp, his hair perfectly coiffed, a carefully cultivated tan. He had that predatory glint in his eye, the one I recognized from too many boardrooms and backroom deals from my own past life, before I traded it all for a trowel and a quiet existence. But it wasn't the Daniel I remembered. Not really. That Daniel was always chasing something, always looking over his shoulder. This one looked like he'd finally caught it, or thought he had. Beside him sat a woman, younger, sharply dressed, with a hard, intelligent gleam in her eyes. A lawyer, no doubt. The kind who eats depositions for breakfast and human decency for dessert. Alex Walker. I'd seen her name on local news channels, always attached to some high-profile, ruthless corporate case. Not the kind of company I'd ever wished for my boy. Daniel stepped out, his gaze sweeping over my modest home, then landing on the kids in the yard. No words, no emotion, just a calculating assessment, like he was looking at an asset. He walked with that swagger he'd picked up somewhere along the line, a false confidence that always grated on my nerves. Arthur, he said, his voice smooth, practiced, devoid of any genuine feeling. He hadn't called me Dad in decades. It's been a while. I pushed myself up from my rocking chair, every joint in my body suddenly feeling the full weight of those 15 years. My hands, calloused and strong from a lifetime of labor, balled into fists. But my voice was calm, steady, betraying none of the earthquake rumbling inside me. Daniel, I replied, my eyes narrowed, taking him in. 15 years, 3 months, and 4 days. Give or take a few hours. That's a long time for a quick hour to watch the kids, wouldn't you say? His smile faltered just for a second. Alex Walker, the lawyer, stepped forward, her heels clicking on my porch steps. She held out a thick envelope. Mr. McKenzie, I am Alex Walker, counsel for Mr. Daniel McKenzie. We have a court order here. My client is here to reclaim his children. I didn't take the envelope. My gaze was fixed on Daniel. Reclaim them? You abandoned them, boy. You didn't even call. Not once. For 15 years, we raised them. We fed them. We picked them up when they fell, literally and figuratively. You think you could just waltz back in here and pretend you're their father? Daniel scoffed, a dismissive wave of his hand. You're an old man, Arthur. Senile. You brainwashed them. I'm their biological father. The law is on my side. He gestured to the kids, who were now standing still, watching us, their laughter silenced, replaced by a growing unease. Look at them. They're living in this. He looked around, implying my humble home was some kind of squalor. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. The kind of knot that used to form right before I had to make a very difficult, very permanent decision. The kind of calm smile my construction crews know means someone's about to learn a very expensive lesson. The law, huh? I repeated, my voice dropping an octave, a dangerous undertone creeping in. You want to talk about the law, Daniel? Because I remember a few things about the law that you might have forgotten. Things that landed you in a heap of trouble back then. Things I spent every last dime and a piece of my soul to make disappear. Alex Walker's eyes darted between us, sensing the shift in the air. She cleared her throat. Mr. Mackenzie, with all due respect, we are simply here to enforce a legal order. We have a judge's signature. If you resist, we will be forced to involve Child Protective Services and the local police, and believe me, that will only make things worse for you. My grandkids started to move closer, their faces etched with confusion and fear. Emma, always the protective one, stepped in front of Sophia. Jake's jaw was set. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and saw not the boy I raised, but a stranger, a predator. He was trying to take my family. He was trying to take my life. And he had no idea who he was dealing with. A low, guttural laugh escaped me, a sound that surprised even myself. Police? CPS? You think that scares me? My gaze swept over Daniel, then over the smug lawyer. You know what's funny about rich people, Daniel? They never see the trap until it's too late. You just sealed your fate with those words, son. All of you. I finally took the envelope from Alex Walker, not looking at her, but straight into Daniel's eyes. I ripped it open, glanced at the papers inside, then crumpled it in my hand. You want to fight, Daniel? You want to drag this into a courtroom? Fine. But you're not just picking a fight with an old man. You're picking a fight with 15 years of love, sacrifice, and a hell of a lot of secrets. And trust me, boy, my secrets are far more damaging than yours. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the old oak tree. The setting sun cast long, ominous shadows. The silence was thick, broken only by the distant cries of the kids, who now fully understood that something terrible was happening. Daniel and Alex exchanged a nervous glance. They had expected an easy win, an old man intimidated into submission. What they got was a wolf, baring his teeth. This wasn't just about the kids anymore. This was about everything, and it had just begun. The crumpled legal papers felt like ash in my hand, a bitter taste in my mouth. My gaze, though fixed on Daniel and his sleek lawyer, was really seeing something else entirely. I was seeing another day, another car, another fading promise. The present faded, replaced by the ghost of a memory, sharp and vivid, as if it happened yesterday. 15 years ago. The words echoed in my head like a death knell for a life I'd known. It was a Tuesday. Cindy had just finished making her famous apple pie, the scent of cinnamon and baked apples filling our cozy kitchen. The kids, all 5 of them, were buzzing with the boundless energy only children possess. Emma, then 5, was drawing princesses. Jake, 3, was trying to climb the kitchen counter. The twins, Olivia and Noah, barely 2, were captivated by a string of yarn, tangled like a ball of wild kittens. And little Sophia, just a baby, gurgling in her high chair. Daniel had pulled up in a beat-up sedan, not the Mercedes of today. He looked stressed, his collar askew, a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool spring air. He walked in, gave Cindy a quick, almost apologetic peck on the cheek, and avoided my eyes entirely. That was his tell. Always had been. Dad, Mom, he'd rushed, his voice strained. I've got a meeting. Huge deal. Can't miss it. Just need you to watch the kids for an hour. Maybe 2. I'll be back, I promise. Cindy, ever the soft touch, had smiled, wiping flour from her hands. Of course, sweetie. Go on. We've got them. I'd watch him then, just like now. His eyes, though, were different. Then, they held a flicker of desperation, a hunted animal's fear. He gave each kid a quick, perfunctory pat on the head, avoiding Sophia's outstretched baby hands. He didn't look back as he walked out the door, didn't wave. Just got in his car, started the engine with a roar, and peeled away from the curb. The last sound of him I'd hear for 15 years was the screech of tires. An hour turned into 2, 2 into 4. By dinner, Cindy's smile had tightened. By midnight, it was gone, replaced by a grim determination. The kids were asleep, their tiny breaths filling the suddenly vast silence of our house. We sat at the kitchen table, the half-eaten pie cooling between us, a symbol of the normalcy that had just shattered. He's not coming back, is he, Art? Cindy's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through me like a surgeon's scalpel. I swallowed, the words catching in my throat. I knew my son. I knew his capacity for self-preservation, for running. No, Honey, I don't think so. That night, we didn't sleep. We planned. We divided the kids' small belongings into makeshift piles. We looked at our modest savings, our retirement plans, and the gaping maw of 5 hungry mouths. Cindy, bless her practical heart, started making lists: formula, diapers, school clothes, doctor's appointments. And me? I called around, discreetly at first, then with growing urgency. Daniel's phone was disconnected. His apartment was empty. His business partners claimed ignorance, or worse, outright hostility. That's when I discovered the true depth of his deceit. Daniel hadn't just skipped out on his kids. He'd skipped out on crippling debts, fraudulent contracts, and a series of shady deals that threatened to drag my own successful, reputable construction company down with him. The name McKinsey & Sons Restoration had been a source of immense pride. Daniel had been the son's part, and he had used it to siphon funds, forge signatures, and leave a trail of broken promises that would have landed me in federal prison if the right people found out. It cost me everything. My company, the legacy I'd built for 30 years. My reputation, painstakingly earned. I sold off assets, paid off disgruntled clients with my own money, called in every favor I'd ever been owed, and pulled every string I possessed, strings that stretched back to my days in Nam, to contacts I thought I'd never need again. It was a brutal, humbling process. I drained my retirement, borrowed against our home, and watched my life's work crumble to protect a son who didn't deserve it. But it wasn't just for Daniel. It was for them. For Emma, Jake, Olivia, Noah, and Sophia. They were innocent. They deserved a home, stability, a chance. So I took my experience, my strong back, and my hands, and I became a simple contractor again. No more big projects, no more high-stakes deals. Just honest work, day in and day out, to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. Those years, they were the hardest and the most rewarding. We stretched every dollar. Cindy worked 2 part-time jobs, baking and tutoring, on top of being a full-time grandmatern mom. I worked until my bones ached, then came home to fix leaky faucets, help with homework, and explain why their daddy was away on a very, very long trip. We told him he was a superhero on a secret mission, and that someday he'd return. A beautiful lie we kept alive for as long as we could, until they were old enough to ask questions that cut too deep. I taught Jake how to change a tire, Emma how to balance a budget, Olivia how to plant a garden, Noah how to tie a knot that would hold house together, and Sophia how to look at the stars and dream. I taught them resilience. I taught them kindness. I taught them that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. It's about who stays. I remembered Emma, her little hand in mine, asking, "Grandpa, why don't other kids have grandpas who tuck them in every night?" My heart ached. I just hugged her tighter. Because, sweetie, I'd said, "You're special. And so am I." We got each other. Cindy, in her later years, as Daniel's absence stretched into a decade, grew wise and, frankly, a little cynical. She saw the pattern in Daniel's life, his history of cutting corners and abandoning responsibilities. "What if he comes back, Art?" she'd ask, watching the kids play. "What if he tries to take them?" That's when the insurance started. Cindy, with her quiet intelligence, had kept copies of everything. Every notice from the bank, every legal letter, every canceled check that proved I'd paid off Daniel's debts. Every newspaper clipping about his fraudulent schemes, carefully highlighted. I, in turn, started documenting everything. Dates, times, emails, letters I never sent, but drafted to various authorities, detailing Daniel's abandonment. A small, sturdy metal box, hidden deep in the back of my workshop, became a repository of a very specific kind of truth. A truth I never wanted to use, but knew in my bones I would one day have to. Because you can't control the storm, that's a given. But you can damn well decide how to build your ship. And I built mine to withstand a hurricane. I built it for them. And now here he was, the hurricane, standing on my porch, dressed in his expensive suit, accompanied by his predatory lawyer, trying to tear down everything I had built. His words, "You're an old man, Arthur. Senile. You've brainwashed them," ignited a slow-burning fury inside me. Brainwashed them? I taught them how to live, how to love, how to be decent human beings. What had he been doing? My eyes flickered from Daniel to Alex Walker, then back to the crumpled paper in my hand. He'd just declared war, and I had a weapon he couldn't possibly imagine. One that Cindy and I had carefully forged, piece by piece, over 15 long, silent years. The courtroom felt sterile, cold, and utterly devoid of the warmth of a home. It was designed for truth, or at least the pursuit of it. But sometimes, truth got lost in the labyrinth of legal jargon and procedural maneuvering. And for a man who'd spent his life building things, brick by brick, the idea of having his family dismantled by words felt like an obscene violation. After Daniel and Alex Walker's visit, the immediate aftermath was pure chaos. The grandkids, their faces pale and drawn, had come rushing to me. "Grandpa, what's going on? Who was that man?" Emma's voice, usually so steady, trembled. Sophia was openly weeping, clinging to my leg. I'd held them close, all 5 of them, their bodies pressed against mine, a human shield. "Everything's going to be all right," I'd promised, my voice rough. "Grandpa's got this." But even as I said it, a part of me knew it wouldn't be easy. Daniel wasn't just my son. He was their biological father. And in the eyes of the law, that carried significant weight. My old friend, Frank Miller, a semi-retired lawyer who used to handle some of my construction contracts, agreed to help me. He was a good man, steady and honest, but even he looked grim. "Art," he'd said, shaking his head as he reviewed Daniel's legal documents, "this is tough. You don't have official guardianship. You just raise them. Daniel's their biological father, and he looks like a successful, upstanding citizen now. He's got a high-powered attorney. This looks bad on paper, my friend." He was right. On paper, it looked terrible. I was an old man, a humble contractor, with no official legal standing over the children I'd raised. Daniel was a biological father, seemingly remorseful, wanting to reconnect. It was a setup. The first hearing was scheduled quickly, expedited by Alex Walker's aggressive tactics. Judge Patrick O'Malley presided, a man whose face was etched with decades of listening to human misery and deceit. His eyes, though weary, held a sharp intelligence. He regarded me with a non-committal expression, but I could feel his scrutiny. Alex Walker, a shark in a tailored suit, started the proceedings. She painted a picture of Daniel as a repentant father, tragically separated from his children by unforeseen circumstances, now eager to reestablish a loving relationship. She then turned her venom on me. "Your Honor," she began, her voice crisp and clear, "Mr. Arthur Mackenzie, while perhaps well-intentioned, has engaged in what can only be described as parental alienation and, frankly, abduction by retention. He deliberately withheld these children from their natural father for 15 years, preventing any contact, and fostering an environment where they believe their biological father simply vanished. This is an egregious violation of parental rights, and, we would argue, emotionally damaging to the children." Daniel, sitting beside her, managed to conjure up a teary-eyed expression, nodding mournfully as she spoke. He looked utterly credible to anyone who didn't know him. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. My lawyer, Frank, did his best. He presented affidavits from teachers, neighbors, and even the local church pastor, all testifying to my unwavering dedication to the children, to the stable and loving home Cindy and I had provided. He emphasized Daniel's 15-year absence, his complete lack of financial support or contact. But Alex Walker had an answer for everything. "Your Honor," she countered smoothly, "Mr. Mackenzie Sr. sold his successful construction business shortly after Mr. Mackenzie Jr.'s departure. This, we contend, was to consolidate assets, making it more difficult for Mr. Mackenzie Jr. to locate them or for any legal recourse to be pursued. Furthermore, Mr. Mackenzie Sr. moved to a more rural area, further isolating the children. My client maintains he searched tirelessly for his children, but Mr. Mackenzie Sr. actively evaded him. Lies. All of it. I hadn't moved to evade Daniel. I'd moved to a smaller, more affordable home after selling my business to pay off Daniel's debts. But it sounded plausible enough to the judge, who, I could tell, was growing skeptical. He was forced to follow the letter of the law. After what felt like an eternity, Judge O'Malley cleared his throat. "Mr. Mackenzie," he addressed me, his voice gravelly, "while I recognize your profound commitment to these children over the past 15 years, the fact remains that you do not possess legal guardianship. Mr. Daniel Mackenzie is their biological father. Given the circumstances, and to allow for proper investigation and reconciliation, I am ordering temporary custody of the children to be granted to Mr. Daniel Mackenzie. Child Protective Services will conduct an assessment of both households. An independent family therapist will be appointed to facilitate contact. We will reconvene in 4 weeks." A gasp went through the small courtroom. My world tilted. Daniel instantly dropped his sorrowful facade, a triumphant smirk flashing across his face. Alex Walker looked smug. And then, the worst part, my grandkids. They were sitting in the back, silent witnesses to the dismantling of their lives. When a verdict was announced, Emma let out a choked sob. Jake stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, his face a mask of anger. Sophia started to cry, a heart-wrenching sound. "No," Emma cried, running towards me. "No, Grandpa. I don't want to go with him. I want to stay with you." The bailiffs moved to intervene. Daniel, now playing the concerned father, tried to approach them. "It's okay, kids," he said, his voice sickeningly sweet. "Daddy's here now. Everything will be fine." But they recoiled from him. They didn't see a father. They saw a stranger. They saw the man who was tearing their world apart. I knelt, holding them, burying my face in Emma's hair, stroking Sophia's trembling back. "Hey," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion but firm. Look at me. Look at me, all of you. It's just for a little while. Grandpa will fight this. You hear me? I will never stop fighting for you. You are my family. You always will be." Their tear-streaked faces looked up at me, hope mingled with raw terror. I hugged them tight, inhaling their familiar scents, imprinting their warmth on my memory. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this separation would be unbearable. But it was only temporary, because he had just declared war on a man who knew how to build, yes, but also how to tear down. And my demolition tools were sharper, far more effective than his legal papers. They were led away by social workers, resisting every step of the way, their small hands reaching back for me. My house, my home, felt utterly empty. The silence that filled it was no longer comforting, but a crushing weight. The scent of Cindy's phantom apple pie was gone, replaced by the bitter tang of injustice. I stood in the silence, my hands shaking, but my resolve hardening into steel. Daniel wanted to play this game? Fine. But he didn't know the first thing about the rules I played by. And he had no idea of the depths of the trenches I'd dug, the traps I'd laid, over those 15 silent years. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was personal, and I was going to make sure he learned a very, very expensive lesson. The hollow ache in my chest was a constant companion. The house, usually bustling with the energetic chaos of 5 teenagers, was now a tomb. Their laughter, their arguments, the strumming of Emma's guitar, the scent of Sophia's art projects, all gone, replaced by a silence that screamed their absence. Every object, every worn chair, every scuff mark on the floor was a phantom limb, a painful reminder of what Daniel had ripped away. But grief, while a potent force, was also a distraction, and I couldn't afford distractions. Not now. I had made a promise to those kids, a sacred vow that echoed Cindy's unwavering spirit. I would fight, and I would win. You know what's funny about old men like me? People look at the gray hair, the slow gait, the tired eyes, and they assume you're done. That your mind is rusted, your instincts dulled. They see a simple contractor, a grandfather. They don't see the years spent in places where a wrong decision meant a body bag. They don't see the sharp-eyed builder who could spot a structural flaw in a glance, or the meticulous planner who could anticipate problems 3 steps ahead. They don't see the man who survived a financial massacre of his own making, then rebuilt his life from scorched earth. Daniel and Alex Walker made that mistake. They saw a target an easy mark. They had no idea they just kicked a sleeping badger. My first move wasn't in a courtroom. It was on the streets, in the shadows, where the real work gets done. I wasn't just reacting to Daniel's moves. I was anticipating his next 3, 4, maybe 5 steps. That's what architects do. They don't just build. They envision the entire structure, predict the stresses, and engineer for every contingency. My first call was to Sergeant Reynolds. He was a grizzled veteran of the local police force, nearing retirement himself. We went way back to the days when I was running McKenzie and Sons, and he was a rookie cop who'd seen enough of Daniel's shenanigans to know he was trouble. He'd helped me quietly navigate some of Daniel's past messes, saving him from jail on more than one occasion, always at my insistence. He owed me a few, and he knew I wouldn't call unless it was serious. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place with lukewarm coffee and stale donuts. He walked in, saw me in the corner booth, and just nodded. No pleasantries. He knew. "Art," he said, sliding into the booth. "Heard Daniel's back in town. Making trouble again." I just looked at him. "He wants my grandkids, Reynolds. Says I kidnapped them." Reynolds snorted. "Kidnapped?" The kids who were practically raising themselves while their old man was playing high-stakes poker with other people's money? "Please." He's got some nerve. He took a sip of his coffee. "So, what do you need?" "Information," I said, keeping my voice low. "Everything. Where he's living, who he's dealing with, what kind of business he's in now, and anything that might connect to his past problems." Reynolds' eyes sharpened. "You mean those old problems you so painstakingly swept under the rug 15 years ago?" "Precisely," I confirmed. "Looks like the rug's getting a little lumpy." He gave me a long, evaluating look. He knew I wasn't asking him to break the law, just to point me in the right direction. He had a network, an ear to the ground. "I'll see what I can find, Art." No promises, but his tone told me he'd deliver. While Reynolds started digging, I started my own reconnaissance. I drove to the upscale neighborhoods, the kind of places Daniel now frequented. Found his address, a sprawling McMansion, a monument to new money and bad taste. Saw him coming and going, always in a designer suit, always with an air of entitlement. There was a new, younger wife, blonde and ornamental, who looked utterly unaware of the 5 children he was trying to claim. This confirmed my suspicions. He wasn't after the kids for love. He was after them for image, for something else, something cold and calculated. My mind went back to the financial crisis 15 years ago. Daniel hadn't just abandoned his children. He'd been running from something much bigger. He left me holding the bag, taking on his debts, fighting off creditors, and dealing with angry investors. The sheer amount of money involved had been staggering, too big for a struggling young real estate agent. He'd clearly been involved in something truly illicit, something that even my cleanup efforts couldn't fully erase. This thought brought me to the next piece of my strategy. Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison used to be Daniel's accountant. A quiet, timid man, easily intimidated. Daniel had used him, manipulated him, and then, when the shit hit the fan, thrown him under the bus. Harrison had been facing serious charges until I stepped in, using my dwindling resources and connections to pull him out of the fire at great personal cost. I'd given him a second chance, helped him find a new, honest job, and told him he owed me nothing, that he just needed to live an honest life. Now, he owed me something. His memory. I found Harrison working as a bookkeeper for a small, struggling hardware store a few towns over. He looked older, more drawn, but the fear in his eyes was still there when he saw me. He remembered. "Mr. McKenzie," he stammered, his hands fiddling with a pen. "It's been a long time." "It has, Harrison," I agreed, taking a seat across from his cluttered desk. "And it seems some old ghosts are coming back to haunt us. Daniel's back, and he's making trouble." Harrison's face paled. "Daniel? What does he want?" "My grandkids," I said flatly, "and he's accusing me of kidnapping them." Harrison swallowed hard. "He wouldn't. He can't." "Oh, he can," I corrected him. "But he doesn't know what I know." "What we know, Harrison. About that night. About those accounts. About the money that vanished into thin air and the people it really belonged to." A tremor ran through him. The investors. The offshore accounts. The shell companies. He looked at me, his eyes wide with fear and a dawning understanding. He covered it up. You covered it up, Mr. Mackenzie, to protect him, and it nearly broke me. I reminded him my voice steel, but also gave me perspective, and it taught me a valuable lesson. Some debts are never truly paid, and some people never change. I leaned forward. Harrison, I need your memory. I need everything you can recall about those financial records, about Daniel's dealings, about anyone he might have crossed. Anything that suggests he was involved in something bigger, something darker than just petty fraud. Harrison hesitated, his gaze flickering nervously to the door. But it's dangerous, Mr. Mackenzie. Those people, they weren't small time. They were connected. I've dealt with worse, Harrison, I said, a faint smile playing on my lips. And I'm not asking you to face them. I'm asking you to help me expose Daniel for what he is, to save my family, to finally bring justice to a man who's evaded it for far too long. His gaze met mine. He saw the cold resolve, the unwavering purpose. He saw the same man who'd save him from ruin. And slowly, a spark of his old self, the one who craved justice, ignited in his eyes. All right, Mr. Mackenzie, he said, his voice stronger now. I'll tell you everything. Every last detail. I kept copies, just in case. Never trusted that man. A flicker of satisfaction, cold and deep, settled in my gut. The first piece of the puzzle. The first blow. Daniel wanted to play chess. He just didn't realize I've been playing Go for decades. And in Go, you don't just attack. You surround. You suffocate. You build a wall of truth until there's nowhere left for your opponent to run. And Daniel had just stepped into my perimeter. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. Harrison's confession was a dam breaking. The memories, long suppressed under layers of fear and self-preservation, spilled out like toxic sludge. He remembered everything. The late-night calls, the frantic meetings, the forged signatures, the shell corporations registered in Delaware and the Caymans, the desperate scramble to shift money around, to make it disappear, to create an illusion of solvency while Daniel's empire of lies was crumbling. It wasn't just small-time fraud, Mr. Mackenzie, Harrison had whispered, his face pale under the fluorescent lights of the hardware store. He was in deep, with people, serious people, the kind who don't take kindly to being crossed. That's why he disappeared. He wasn't running from you or the kids. He was running for his life, and he left you to clean up his mess. A bitter laugh escaped me. I knew it. In my gut, I'd always known it. That desperate flicker in Daniel's eyes, the day he dropped off the kids, it wasn't just stress. It was terror. He hadn't just abandoned his children. He'd performed an act of cowardice, shedding his family like a snake sheds its skin, all to escape the consequences of his greed. My son had always been drawn to the glitter of wealth, the illusion of power. From a young age, I'd seen it. Not the honest ambition that built businesses, but the yearning for quick riches, the easy path. I had tried, God knows I had tried to guide him. I gave him a solid foundation, brought him into Mackenzie and Sons, taught him the value of hard work, of craftsmanship, of integrity. Flashback. I remembered him, a young man fresh out of business school, brimming with ideas, some good, many dangerously naive. Dad, he'd said, pacing my office, blueprints scattered across the table. We could be huge. National. Why stick to just restoration? There's so much money in new development, in flipping properties, in leveraging assets. I'd listened patiently, trying to temper his enthusiasm with caution. Daniel, we build things to last. Relationships, reputation, structures. We don't chase fads. We build trust. He'd always chafed under that. He wanted the fast lane, the flashy cars, the big houses, the veneer of success without the painstaking labor beneath. And when he eventually convinced me to let him head up a new development division, against my better judgment, I saw the cracks appear, the cutting of corners, the shoddy materials hidden behind expensive finishes, the inflated invoices. I tried to rein him in, but he was always one step ahead, always charming, always with an excuse. Then came the bigger fish. The developers with too much money, too many connections, and a reputation for getting what they wanted, no matter the cost. They saw Daniel's ambition, his ruthlessness, his willingness to bend the rules. They groomed him, and he, blinded by the promise of untold wealth, fell right into their trap. Harrison's details filled in the blanks. Daniel hadn't just defrauded a few local investors. He'd been entangled in a massive land deal, a complex scheme to buy up properties, inflate their value, and then sell them off to a shell company for a massive profit, leaving the original owners and small-time investors holding empty bags. This involved money laundering, tax evasion, and possibly even coercion. When the SEC and a few other federal agencies started sniffing around, Daniel panicked. That was the night. He'd been told to disappear, to shed all ties, to become a ghost. And he'd done it with chilling efficiency. My grandchildren were simply collateral damage, discarded without a second thought. I remember the anguish, the sleepless nights, the way Cindy cried herself to sleep. My son was a criminal, a coward, but he was also my son. And in that moment of crisis, my first instinct wasn't justice, but protection. I buried the evidence. I paid the hush money. I called in those favors from my military past, from contacts who could make certain problems vanish, or at least delay them indefinitely. It cost me everything, my business, my savings, my peace of mind. But it kept Daniel out of jail, and it kept the kid from living with the shame of their father being a convict. It was a Faustian bargain, one I'd wrestled with for years. I hadn't kept those proofs to use against him then. I kept them to understand him, to be prepared if he ever tried to hurt anyone else. It was my safeguard, my insurance policy against his inherent destructive nature. Cindy, ever the pragmatist, had understood. He'll come back, she'd said, her voice heavy with foreboding. When he thinks it's safe. When he thinks there's something to gain. She'd insisted we formalize the collection of evidence, had it notarized, even anticipating this exact scenario. She was always one step ahead. And now he had come back, not for love, but for leverage. Perhaps his current, seemingly legitimate real estate empire was built on shaky ground, and he needed the illusion of a wholesome family man to secure a new, massive investment. Or perhaps there was a trust fund, a forgotten inheritance that required direct heirs. Whatever it was cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of human warmth. He was a cancer, and he was threatening to infect my family again. My conversation with Harrison, coupled with Reynolds' initial inquiries, confirmed my darkest suspicions. Daniel was still involved in shady dealings, just on a grander scale. His current firm was a labyrinth of LLCs, shell corporations, and suspiciously quick land acquisitions in burgeoning areas, often displacing established communities. The patterns were identical to 15 years ago, just polished and disguised. The anger inside me was no longer a burning rage, but a cold, clear focus. I wasn't just protecting my grandchildren. I was correcting a mistake I'd made a long time ago. I had saved Daniel then, and he had learned nothing but how to be a better criminal. This time, there would be no saving him. This time, I would build a case so irrefutable, so damning, that it would bury him not just legally, but entirely. The shadows of the past were long, but I had learned to navigate them. And now, I was ready to bring them into the light. My strategy was clear. I wouldn't just defend. I would expose. And the architect of his own destruction would be Daniel himself. All I had to do was provide the stage. You know, life is like a construction project. Most people see the finished building, clean lines, polished surfaces. But I see the foundation, the framing, the plumbing, the electrical work, all the hidden elements that hold it together, or that, if flawed, will bring the whole damn thing crashing down. Daniel, bless his heart, only ever saw the facade. He never understood the importance of the unseen. And that was his fatal flaw. After my meeting with Harrison, and with Reynolds quietly pulling strings, the pieces of Daniel's current empire started to reveal their true, rotten structure. He was involved in a massive gentrification project, buying up old, run-down neighborhoods in a promising part of the city, displacing long-time residents with promises of revitalization that never quite materialized, only to flip the properties to high-end developers. Classic Daniel. Only now, the stakes were much higher, and the financial paper trail was far more complex. I wasn't going to just sit back and let Alex Walker spin her legal web. I wasn't just going to react. That was the rookie mistake. A true builder anticipates the stresses, the weak points, the points of failure. And I was going to engineer Daniel's collapse. My strategy was simple, elegant, and utterly merciless. I would use Daniel's own greed, his own ruthlessness, against him. First, I put Mr. Harrison to work. Not directly in the legal case, but as a ghost in Daniel's machine. Harrison, still working as a bookkeeper, had a wide network of old contacts in the financial sector, many of whom had been burned by Daniel's past schemes. I instructed Harrison to casually drop hints, not direct accusations, nothing actionable for Daniel, just enough to sow seeds of doubt. You know, Harrison might say to an old acquaintance from a bank, "I heard Daniel McKenzie's new project is getting really aggressive with property acquisitions. A lot of leverage. Hope he's diversified this time. Remember what happened last time, before he, disappeared? Subtle, insidious. The kind of whispers that spread like wildfire in the tightly knit world of finance, especially when coupled with old rumors. Banks get nervous. Investors get wary. Suddenly, Daniel's carefully cultivated image of a successful, stable entrepreneur starts to fray at the edges. Small delays in loan approvals. Extra scrutiny on his financial statements. Nothing concrete, just a persistent, irritating drip of suspicion. Next, I turned my attention to Detective Grayson. He was a young, sharp detective I'd observed at the local precinct, ambitious, methodical, and untainted by the kind of old boy networks Reynolds and I had navigated for decades. He was the future of law enforcement, not bound by past loyalties or favors. He was perfect. I didn't contact him directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, I crafted anonymous tips. Not about Daniel directly, at least not yet, but about the patterns I'd observed in Daniel's current real estate deals. Concerns about property valuation, unusual capital flows in local development projects, discrepancies in zoning applications. I made sure the tips were just vague enough to pique interest, but detailed enough to point Grayson towards the right files, the right districts, the right names. Names that, if he dug deep enough, would inevitably lead him back to Daniel McKenzie. It was like setting a series of small, controlled fires. Nothing that would immediately burn Daniel down, but enough to create smoke, enough to make people look. And when people started looking, they'd eventually see the rot. Meanwhile, Daniel, oblivious, was still playing the role of the distraught father. He had the kids now, ostensibly in his care. But I knew from my occasional, covert communications with Emma that it was a charade. Grandpa, she'd whispered on a burner phone I'd given her, a precaution I'd taken for years, ever since Daniel's first disappearance. He acts like he cares when other people are around, but when they leave, he just leaves us alone. He barely looks at Sophia. He got mad at Jake for being too loud. He told me I was too old for emotional drama. My blood ran cold. He hadn't changed. He never would. The children were not his family. They were props. They were a means to an end. I listened, quietly, to Emma's anxieties, to their struggles to adapt to Daniel's opulent but cold world. I told them to be strong, to stick together, to observe everything. Keep your eyes open, I told Emma. Notice everything, even the smallest things. Sometimes the devil's in the details. I knew she was smart enough to understand the veiled warning, and she was brave enough to listen. The small, constant flow of information back to me was invaluable. It confirmed my theories, provided new angles. Daniel wasn't spending time with them. He was hosting lavish parties, entertaining clients, living the high life, while the kids were shunted into a forgotten wing of his massive house, ignored. They were just another one of his properties, acquired, then left to depreciate. One evening, Emma called me, her voice filled with a desperate urgency. Grandpa, he hit Noah. Just a slap because Noah spilled juice on his new rug. And he threatened Jake if he told anyone. The rage, cold and absolute, returned. That was it. That was the line. He could try to hurt me, but he would never hurt my grandchildren. I remembered the feeling of holding a loaded weapon, the weight of the decision in my hands. This was no different. He had just ensured his own downfall. My anonymous calls to Detective Grayson became more direct, more specific. The concerns became suspicious patterns. the discrepancies became potential illegal activities. I didn't name Daniel yet, but I provided enough breadcrumbs that even a blind man could find a trail. At the same time, I started strategically leaking information to a local investigative journalist, a tough-as-nails woman who specialized in exposés on corrupt local developers. Again, no names, just enough details about the plight of displaced residents and questionable property deals to spark her interest. She started asking questions, writing articles. The pressure began to mount, not just on Daniel, but on the local political figures who had approved his projects. Daniel's world, once so meticulously constructed, was starting to show signs of stress. The small cracks, the invisible weaknesses, the foundation I had quietly undermined was starting to give, and he was too busy admiring his facade to notice the subtle, escalating tremors. He thought he was playing chess, but I wasn't playing chess. I was orchestrating a collapse, and the next move would be in the courtroom, where I would finally reveal the rotten core of his entire operation. The second court hearing felt different. The air was thicker, charged with a subtle tension that even the most casual observer might have missed. Daniel and Alex Walker still wore their masks of polished confidence, but I could detect the faint tremor beneath the surface. Whispers were starting to spread, ripples from the pebbles I'd been dropping into the pond. The local paper had run a couple of scathing articles on unethical development practices in the city, and while Daniel's name hadn't been explicitly mentioned, the descriptions of the projects and the figures involved were unmistakable. I sat beside Frank, my lawyer, who looked more anxious than usual. He was a good man, but he was accustomed to playing by the rules. He didn't understand the game I was playing. Not entirely. Judge O'Malley, however, seemed to have noticed. His eyes, usually weary, held a sharper gleam. He had that look of a man who senses there's more to the story than what's being presented. Alex Walker began, predictably, with another scathing attack on my character, painting me as an old, embittered man clinging to children who were not legally mine. She presented glowing reports from a court-appointed therapist, carefully chosen by her team, who claimed the children were adjusting well to their father's home, and that Daniel was making diligent efforts to bond. Lies. All of it. Emma's calls had confirmed as much. They were miserable, isolated, and now terrified. When it was my turn, Frank focused on Daniel's continued absence and lack of contact. But I knew that wasn't enough. I needed to rattle them. Your Honor, I began, my voice calm, but with an underlying steel that cut through the sterile courtroom air. Ms. Walker paints a picture of my son as a doting father, dedicated to his children. Yet, just weeks ago, during this very period of reconciliation, his youngest son, Noah, was physically disciplined for a minor household accident. My grandson, Jake, was threatened into silence. And Emma, who is sitting here today, can attest to the emotional distress they've all been subjected to under her client's care. Alex Walker immediately jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay. Mr. Mackenzie is slandering my client with unsubstantiated claims. Judge O'Malley held up a hand. Objection noted, Ms. Walker. However, Mr. Mackenzie, this court is tasked with the welfare of these children. If there are allegations of abuse, they must be addressed formally. Have you filed a report? I have not, Your Honor. I replied, my gaze fixed on Daniel, whose face had gone pale. He knew I wouldn't lie. He knew I was telling the truth. Because I chose to address it here, directly, where my son cannot hide behind a veneer of carefully crafted lies. I can produce sworn affidavits from neighbors who heard the commotion, from teachers who noticed Noah's sudden shift in demeanor, and I believe the children themselves, if allowed to speak freely, would confirm my claims. The mention of affidavits and direct testimony from the children themselves sent a ripple of alarm through Alex Walker. She knew the kids despised Daniel. Their carefully curated therapist reports would crumble under their honest words. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Judge O'Malley leaned forward. Mr. Mackenzie, he said, these are serious accusations. Mr. Daniel Mackenzie, do you deny these claims? Daniel hesitated, floundering. He glanced at Alex, who gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Your Honor, he stammered, I was merely trying to instill discipline. Children need boundaries. And my son was unruly. His admission, however weakly worded, was a crack in their facade. It confirmed that he was not the patient, loving father they were trying to portray. Judge O'Malley's expression hardened. Discipline is one thing, Mr. McKenzie. Physical intimidation of a minor is quite another. This raises significant concerns regarding the stability and safety of your home environment. And your earlier claims of tireless searching for your children are contradicted by your complete lack of financial support for 15 years. Can you provide any concrete evidence of these searches? Any phone records, travel logs, communication attempts? Daniel squirmed, unable to produce anything. His carefully constructed narrative was unraveling. The judge, a man who had seen it all, looked from Daniel to me, then to the 5 bewildered faces of my grandchildren sitting nervously in the back row. He saw the fear in their eyes when they looked at their father and the desperate yearning when their gaze found mine. Given the conflicting testimony, the serious allegations of misconduct, and the clear emotional distress of the children, Judge O'Malley finally declared, his voice firm, "I cannot, at this juncture, grant permanent custody to Mr. Daniel McKenzie. I am extending the temporary custody arrangement for another month. During this time, the children will remain with Mr. Daniel McKenzie, but under much stricter supervision by Child Protective Services, including unscheduled visits. Mr. Arthur McKenzie will be granted supervised visitation rights, and I will be appointing an independent family therapist to assess the children's wishes and safety. Furthermore, Mr. Daniel McKenzie is ordered to provide detailed financial disclosures for the past 15 years, along with any and all evidence of his alleged attempts to locate his children." Another month. It was a partial victory. It gave me time. It forced Daniel to reveal more of his hand. After the hearing, the interaction with my grandkids was short, supervised, and heartbreaking. They were brought into a small, sterile room, guarded by a CPS worker. Emma rushed into my arms, sobbing, "Grandpa, please, get us out of here. He's horrible. He ignores us. He yells all the time." Jake and Noah, usually stoic, looked utterly defeated. Sophia, still so small, simply clung to my hand, her eyes wide with fear. I held them, my heart clenching with pain and renewed resolve. I know. I whispered, stroking their hair. "Just a little longer. Be strong, my little fighters. Grandpa's got a plan. You trust me?" They nodded, tears streaming down their faces. "Good," I said, a grim determination settling over me. Because sometimes the darkest hour is just before the dawn. And I promise you, my sunrise is coming. As Daniel led them away, his face a mask of barely concealed fury, he shot me a venomous look. He saw the quiet resolve in my eyes. He knew, I could tell, that I was far from defeated. But he had no idea of the storm I was about to unleash. He thought he won a battle. But the war, the real war, had only just begun. And the architect of his demise was now ready to bring down the whole rotten structure he'd built. The month leading up to the final hearing was a blur of frantic, calculated action. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, replaced by the relentless churning of my mind. Every contact, every piece of information, every memory I possessed was a brick in the wall I was building around Daniel. I wasn't just going to win, I was going to obliterate him. Not out of malice, but out of absolute necessity. For the kids, for Cindy, for the quiet honor of a life spent building, not destroying. My first stop was to see my old notary, Martha Jenkins. Martha had been notarizing my construction contract for decades, a no-nonsense woman with a keen eye for detail and an even keener sense of discretion. She knew the value of a sealed document. I presented her with a thick, plain brown envelope. Inside were the originals of every damning piece of evidence I had collected over the years. Harrison's detailed records of Daniel's old financial fraud, copies of the forged documents, the anonymous tips to federal agencies that had mysteriously vanished after I intervened, even a notarized statement from Cindy, written just before she died, detailing her fears about Daniel's return and her explicit wish for the children's welfare. And at the very bottom, the most critical document of all, A flimsy, nearly illegible, but surprisingly binding agreement Daniel had signed 15 years ago, effectively, if unofficially, relinquishing his parental rights in exchange for me bailing him out of his financial mess. He thought it was a joke, a meaningless piece of paper to placate his desperate father. I knew it was his undoing. Martha examined each document with her usual meticulousness, her glasses perched on her nose. She didn't ask questions. She knew when to be silent. When she was done, she sealed the envelope with a special wax stamp, dating it precisely. "This is a serious document, Art," she said, her voice low. "Make sure you use it wisely." "I will, Martha," I promised. "It's for the right reasons." Next, I met with Sergeant Reynolds again. He handed me a folder, unmarked. "You're a resourceful old coot, Art," he grumbled, but there was a hint of respect in his voice. "Detective Grayson's been asking a lot of questions about those developers. Seems your anonymous calls hit a nerve. Some of these shell companies, they're connected to some very unsavory characters. Federal level unsavory." He nodded towards the folder. "And this is what I dug up on Daniel's searches. Nothing. Zero. Zip. No phone records, no attempts to contact Child Protective Services, no missing persons reports. He was a ghost. Until now." The folder also contained a few other items. Detailed reports on Daniel's current company's aggressive acquisition tactics, complaints from displaced residents, and whispers of bribery within the local zoning commission. It was all corroborating evidence, reinforcing the patterns of his past. "You've built quite a case, Sart," Reynolds said, looking at me with a rare intensity. "You always did have a knack for planning." "Some things," I replied, "are worth planning for, and some people are worth digging up. The hardest part was preparing the kids. I couldn't tell them everything. Not yet. The truth about their father's abandonment and criminality was a bitter pill, one they weren't ready to swallow whole. But I knew I needed to give them strength, to prepare them for the emotional shockwave that was coming. During my supervised visitations, I made sure to spend individual time with each of them, away from Daniel's prying eyes and the CPS worker under the guise of family therapy. I spoke in metaphors, in stories about old houses, about weak foundations, about storms and rebuilding. Sometimes I told Emma, when you're building a house, you find rot in the walls. You can patch it up, paint over it, but eventually the rot will spread. To truly save the house, you have to tear down the bad parts, expose them to the light, and rebuild with something stronger. Emma, wise beyond her years, looked at me, her eyes filled with understanding. "Is that what you're doing, Grandpa? Tearing down the rot?" "Something like that, honey," I said, squeezing her hand. "And it's going to be messy, but it's necessary. And when it's over, we'll build something new, something real." I gave each of them a small, sentimental token that had belonged to Cindy, a worn pocket watch for Jake, a polished river stone for Noah, a tiny silver locket for Olivia, a delicate pressed flower in a frame for Sophia. Emma already had Cindy's old guitar. "Your grandma Cindy," I told them, "she always said the strongest foundations weren't made of concrete, but of love. Remember that. Remember who you are. And remember, no matter what happens, you have a family. And you always will." They understood the unspoken message. Something big was coming. And I was their protector. The internal struggle was immense. Daniel was my son, my flesh and blood. To expose him, to send him to prison, would be to destroy him. It was a burden, a pain I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But the moment Emma had told me about him hitting Noah, the moment I saw the fear in Sophia's eyes, that burden lifted. My loyalty was no longer divided. It lay entirely with my grandchildren. He had forfeited his claim to my protection the moment he raised a hand to them. I made one last anonymous call to Detective Grayson. "Detective," I said, disguising my voice with a slight, gravelly tone, "I believe if you look into the property acquisitions by Sterling Development, specifically the Smithfield residential project, you'll find some very interesting discrepancies, particularly in the initial appraisals and the eventual resale values. And perhaps a few ghost corporations that seem to be sharing significant capital with Mr. Daniel Mackenzie." Grayson, I knew, was meticulous. He'd follow the money, and where that money led, Daniel would surely follow. I stood in my workshop, the smell of sawdust and old wood filling the air, a comfort I hadn't realized I missed. I picked up an old, well-oiled hammer, feeling its familiar weight in my hand. This wasn't just about justice. It was about rectifying a past failure. Daniel had chosen his path, and now I would ensure he walked it to its inevitable conclusion. The final act was upon us. The courtroom on the day of the final hearing was a hive of controlled chaos. Every seat was filled. The hum of anticipation was palpable, a low thrum beneath the forced decorum. Word had spread, fed by the investigative journalists' relentless articles and the buzzing gossip in the legal community. This wasn't just a custody battle anymore. It was a spectacle. Daniel and Alex Walker walked in, radiating an aura of strained composure. Daniel looked sharper, more polished than ever, his suit impeccable, his smile practiced. But I could see the subtle sheen of sweat on his forehead, the way his eyes darted around, betraying a flicker of unease. He was trying too hard. My grandchildren were there too, sitting with a stern-faced Child Protective Services representative. Emma caught my eye, a spark of defiance in her gaze. Jake sat ramrod straight, his jaw tight. Even Sophia, usually so shy, looked at Daniel with a cold, almost accusatory stare. They had seen too much, and they were ready. Judge O'Malley entered, his imposing figure silencing the murmurs. He took his seat, his gaze sweeping over the packed room, lingering for a moment on my grandchildren, then on Daniel and me. He understood the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just about legal custody, it was about the very fabric of a family, and perhaps about a deeper justice that had long been deferred. Alex Walker began her closing argument, her voice a weapon, sharp and precise. She reiterated her narrative. Daniel, the repentant father, held hostage by an overzealous grandfather. She highlighted Daniel's apparent success, his ability to provide a stable, affluent environment for the children, contrasting it with my modest circumstances and unsubstantiated claims of abuse. She tried to paint me as manipulative, desperate, even a danger to the children's emotional well-being by withholding them from their biological father. Your Honor, she concluded, her voice rising to a crescendo, the law is clear. A biological parent, when capable and willing, has an undeniable right to their children. Mr. Daniel McKenzie has demonstrated both. To deny him custody would be to perpetuate an injustice and cause irreparable harm to these children who have been, through no fault of their own, alienated from their father for far too long. It was a masterful performance, a tapestry of half-truths and calculated omissions, designed to appeal to the letter of the law and the emotional sympathy of the court. Then Daniel spoke. He stood, his shoulders slightly slumped, playing the part of the long-suffering victim. His voice cracked with feigned emotion as he spoke of his unbearable pain of being separated from his children, his countless sleepless nights spent wondering where they were, his devotion to making up for lost time. He even managed to squeeze out a few crocodile tears. It was sickening, but to an outsider, it would have been convincing. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, my joints aching, but my resolve firm. I looked at the judge, then at my grandchildren, then finally directly at Daniel, whose eyes flickered nervously, unable to hold my gaze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't resort to theatrics. I just spoke the truth, quietly, with the weight of 15 years behind every word. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady, carrying an authority that transcended the sterile courtroom. My son speaks of love, of devotion, of sleepless nights. He speaks of a father's rights. But rights, Your Honor, come with responsibilities. They come with sacrifice, and they come with presence. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. For 15 years, my son was absent, not on a secret mission, as we told the children for so long, not searching tirelessly, but simply gone. He left 5 small children, a grieving wife, my wife, Cindy, and a mountain of debt, consequences of his own reckless choices. He left me to pick up the pieces, to be both grandfather and father, to rebuild a family from the ruins he left behind. My voice softened, filled with genuine emotion. Cindy and I, We didn't just watch these children. We raised them. We taught Emma to find her voice, Jake to stand tall, Olivia and Noah to find joy in the little things, and Sophia to dream. We dried their tears, celebrated their triumphs, and held them through their nightmares. We taught them what family truly means. It isn't about blood alone, Your Honor. It's about who shows up. It's about who stays. It's about who loves you unconditionally, day in and day out for 15 years. I looked at Daniel again. My son claims I alienated his children. He claims I brainwashed them. But children, Your Honor, are not so easily fooled. They know who feeds them, who teaches them, who tucks them in at night. They know who loves them, and they know who abandoned them. A collective gasp went through the courtroom as I directly challenged Daniel's narrative. Judge O'Malley's gaze was fixed on me, his expression unreadable. Then, I turned my gaze back to the judge. Your Honor, my son has spoken of his renewed desire to be a father. He has spoken of his rights. But what he has failed to mention is the true reason for his initial disappearance, or the true reason for his return. I looked directly at Daniel, a hard, cold glint in my eyes. He speaks of love, Your Honor, but I speak of fraud, of deceit, of a criminal past he abandoned along with his children, and of a present built on the same shaky ground. Daniel's face went white. Alex Walker, beside him, shifted, her eyes narrowing, suddenly alert, realizing that something far beyond a custody battle was about to unfold. Judge O'Malley leaned forward. Mr. McKenzie, he said, his voice quiet but piercing, these are grave accusations. Do you have proof? Your Honor, I replied, my hand reaching into my inner jacket pocket, pulling out the sealed, brown envelope. It felt heavy, not just with paper, but with the weight of years of sacrifices, of silent battles fought. My son, Daniel McKenzie, is not just an absent father. He is a man who fled justice 15 years ago, leaving me to clean up his mess. And he returned not for his children, but because he thought his past was buried. He was wrong, and I have the proof. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom, a wave of stunned silence. All eyes were on me, then on the plain brown envelope in my hand. It was an insignificant object, yet it held the power to shatter Daniel's carefully constructed world. Daniel, meanwhile, was a statue, his face drained of color, his eyes wide with a terror I hadn't seen since that day 15 years ago. Alex Walker, for the first time, looked genuinely rattled. She stood, half raising her hand, but no words came out. She knew. She sensed the impending avalanche. Your Honor, I repeated, my voice steady, betraying none of the earthquake rumbling inside me. My son lies. And I have the evidence to prove it. This was entrusted to me by my late wife, Cindy, who, like me, foresaw this very day. She wanted the truth to come out, should it ever be necessary to protect our grandchildren. I walked slowly towards the clerk, placed the envelope on the desk, and pushed it gently forward. Please, Your Honor, examine its contents. The clerk, a seasoned woman, carefully picked up the envelope and handed it to Judge O'Malley. The silence in the room was absolute, punctuated only by the rustling of paper as the judge slowly, deliberately, broke the wax seal. He extracted the documents within. His eyes, which had seen 1,000 deceptions, widened as he read. First, Harrison's meticulous financial records, tracing the labyrinthine flow of money from Daniel's old development projects to offshore accounts, detailing the fraudulent loans and the shell corporations. Then, copies of newspaper clippings, highlighted with dates, detailing a series of unsolved financial scams from 15 years prior, all pointing back to Daniel's former business dealings. Anonymous letters, sent to various federal agencies, all detailing the same patterns of fraud and money laundering, letters I had intercepted and carefully filed away, choosing to protect my son then. The judge's gaze sharpened as he pulled out the core of the evidence. Cindy's notarized letter. In it, she detailed her growing suspicions, her fear for the children's safety, and her explicit instructions to me to use this evidence if Daniel ever returned to harm them or jeopardize their future. She also alluded to a hidden safe deposit box containing even more damning evidence of Daniel's involvement with truly dangerous figures, details I hadn't even fully uncovered, knowing only enough to keep my distance. Finally, his fingers closed around the last document. The flimsy, crumpled piece of paper Daniel had signed all those years ago. It wasn't a formal legal document, but it was a signed, witnessed acknowledgement that Daniel, facing financial ruin and potential jail time, had voluntarily and explicitly relinquished all parental claims to his children in exchange for my intervention and financial bailout. He'd scoffed at it then, thinking it meaningless. I knew its true weight. It was a signed confession of abandonment, disguised as a desperate bargain. Judge O'Malley's face, usually a mask of judicial neutrality, went through a series of subtle but profound changes: surprise, then a growing realization, and finally, a deep, weary anger. He looked up from the documents, his gaze sweeping over Daniel, who was now trembling visibly. "Mr. Daniel Mackenzie," the judge's voice was low, but it resonated with a dangerous authority that made the air crackle. "Are you aware of these documents?" Daniel could only shake his head, mute with terror. Judge O'Malley turned his gaze to my grandchildren, sitting bewildered in the back. Their faces were a mixture of fear and dawning confusion. He then looked back at me, his eyes holding a profound question, one that went beyond the legalities and delved into the moral abyss of what I had just done. "They know about this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed through the silent courtroom like a thunderclap. He gestured subtly to the documents, to the revelation of their father's monstrous deceit. I met his gaze, my own eyes hard but unwavering. I thought of Emma's cries, Jake's anger, Sophia's fear. I thought of Cindy's quiet strength, her foresight. And I thought of the 15 years of silence, of sacrifice, of building a home from nothing but love. "Not yet, Your Honor," I replied, my voice clear and steady. "But they will, when the time is right." The words hung in the air, a promise and a threat. The courtroom erupted. Whispers turned into gasps, then into outright exclamations. Reporters started scribbling furiously. Daniel, broken, buried his face in his hands, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him in a heap of shame and exposure. Alex Walker, her face ashen, turned to him, her professional composure utterly shattered. Her career, her reputation, were crumbling before her eyes. She'd hitched her star to a fraud. Judge O'Malley slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Order! Order in this court." He fixed his gaze on Daniel, no longer with judicial neutrality, but with the cold fury of a man who has witnessed profound injustice. "Mr. Daniel Mackenzie," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Based on this new, compelling evidence, I am immediately suspending this custody hearing. Furthermore, I am initiating an immediate, full federal investigation into the financial fraud and criminal activity detailed in these documents. Bailiffs, secure Mr. Daniel Mackenzie. He is to be taken into custody immediately." 2 bailiffs moved swiftly, converging on Daniel, who offered no resistance. He was a shell, a pathetic figure, his expensive suit now just a costume for a broken man. As they led him away, his head still buried in his hands, he passed my grandchildren. They looked at him, not with pity, but with a dawning horror, a realization of the monster he truly was. My world, once shrouded in the secrecy of protection, had just been laid bare. It was a painful, brutal exposure, but it was also liberation. The truth, after 15 years, was finally out, and my family, my real family, was finally safe. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of noise, confusion, and raw emotion. The courtroom, minutes ago a stage for Daniel's lies, was now a storm of reporters, flashing cameras, and hushed conversations. Amidst the chaos, the one thing that mattered most was the kids. They ran to me, a desperate, stumbling wave of relief and terror. Emma, her eyes wide and red-rimmed, clutched my arm, burying her face in my shoulder. Jake, usually so reserved, wrapped his arms around my waist, his body trembling. Olivia and Noah clung to my hands, their faces pale. Sophia, the youngest, just pressed herself against my leg, sobbing quietly. "Grandpa, what was that?" Emma whispered, her voice choked with tears. "What did Judge O'Malley say? What did he do?" I held them tight, my gaze sweeping over the wreckage of Daniel's life, now being led away in handcuffs. The knot in my chest, the one that had tightened with every lie Daniel told, slowly began to loosen. But it wasn't replaced by triumph, not entirely. Only by a profound weariness and a deep, aching sadness for the innocence they had just lost. "It's over, kids," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "It's finally over. He can't hurt you anymore." A young woman in a CPS uniform approached, her expression a mix of concern and something akin to awe. "Mr. Mackenzie, we need to speak with the children to ensure their welfare. They're fine," I interrupted, my voice firm, not unkindly. "They're just scared. They need their family right now, and their family is right here." I looked directly at the CPS worker, my eyes conveying an unspoken message. "Don't you dare try to separate us again." She hesitated, then, seeing the raw protectiveness in my gaze and the children's desperate need, nodded, stepping back slightly. Then, a familiar figure approached through the throng. Detective Grayson. He looked younger than I remembered from our anonymous calls, but his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and now filled with a grim understanding. "Mr. Mackenzie," he said, extending a hand. "Detective Grayson, we've been following some interesting leads. Seems your anonymous calls were more than just concerns." There was a wry twist to his lips. "You know a lot about how to make a paper trail disappear, but you also know how to make one appear, don't you?" I just looked at him, a faint, weary smile on my face. "Some things, detective, you learn over a lifetime. Some debts are old, and some, like justice, eventually come due." He nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the intricate game I'd played. "It looks like we've got a lot of digging to do on Sterling Development. And on Mr. Daniel Mackenzie. These documents, they open up a whole can of worms. Federal worms." He gave me a knowing look. "Seems like you've been sitting on quite a bit of truth for a long time." "Truth," I replied, "is a heavy thing. Sometimes you bury it to protect. Sometimes you unearth it to save. It just depends on the season." He nodded again, then moved off to speak with the prosecutors, leaving me with my shaken, bewildered grandchildren. The reporters swarmed, their microphones thrust forward, their questions a barrage of noise. "Mr. Mackenzie, what was in that envelope? Are you pressing charges against your son? What will happen to the children?" I put an arm around Emma, guiding her and the others towards the exit. "No comment," I stated, my voice firm, cutting through the din. "My only concern right now is my family, and they need peace." As we walked out of the courthouse, the setting sun, much like the one that had painted my porch golden on that fateful day, cast long shadows. But this time, the shadows felt different. They felt like the fading of a long, dark night, not the coming of one. The drive home was quiet, broken only by the occasional sniffle from Sophia. The magnitude of what had just happened, of the truth revealed, weighed heavily on them. They were no longer innocent children believing in a superhero father. They were young adults, raw and vulnerable, faced with the devastating reality of a monstrous betrayal. When we pulled into our driveway, my small, familiar house, which had felt like a tomb just weeks ago, now looked like a sanctuary, a refuge. We walked inside, the silence a stark contrast to the earlier chaos. "Grandpa," Jake said, his voice hesitant, as we sat in the living room, a silent huddle on the old sofa. "Is Dad really a criminal?" My heart ached. This was the hardest part, breaking the illusions I had painstakingly maintained for so long. But the truth, however painful, was necessary for them to heal. I looked at their earnest, wounded faces. "Yes, son," I said softly. "He is. And he was, even before he left you. He made some very bad choices, hurt a lot of people, and he tried to run from the consequences. He left you not because he didn't love you, but because he was selfish and afraid, and because he was trying to save himself." I then told them, in careful, measured words, a simplified version of the truth. about the financial schemes, about how I had tried to protect him, and in doing so, had almost lost everything, about Cindy's foresight and the insurance we had kept. I didn't sugarcoat it, but I didn't dwell on the darkest details either. They would learn more as they grew older, if they chose to. Emma, wiping her tears, looked at me with a new understanding, a new respect. You did all that for us. You lost everything. Not everything, I said, looking around at them. I gained everything that truly mattered. You and your grandma Cindy, she understood. She always said, family isn't about avoiding the storm, Art. It's about weathering it together. The grief for Daniel, for the son I once hoped he could be, was a dull ache, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of peace. The burden of that secret, of his past, had been lifted, and my grandchildren, my world, were finally safe. The healing would be long and difficult, but at least now it could begin, and we would face it together as a family. My family. The days and weeks that followed were a testament to the resilience of children and the quiet power of a home built on love. The initial shock of the revelation was immense. The grandkids, naturally, grappled with a maelstrom of emotions: anger, confusion, betrayal, and a deep, gnawing sadness for the father they never truly had. But beneath it all was a growing sense of relief, a realization that the constant, low-grade anxiety of Daniel's presence, of his sudden return, was finally gone. Our house, which had felt so empty, slowly began to breathe again. Emma picked up her guitar, though her songs were now tinged with a melancholic introspection. Jake, with a newfound seriousness, started helping me with the yard work, his strong hands finding purpose. Olivia and Noah, the boisterous twins, found solace in their shared world, their whispered conversations now focusing on healing, not fear. And little Sophia, still the most fragile, began to draw again, filling her sketchbooks with vibrant colors, slowly pushing out the shadows. We talked a lot, not just about Daniel, but about everything, about life, choices, consequences, and the complicated nature of family. I made sure to explain the nuances, the impossible choices I'd faced, and why Cindy and I had kept his secrets for so long. It wasn't to protect him, I emphasized, but to protect them, to spare them the trauma of growing up with a father in prison, to give them a chance at a normal life. He chose his path, kids, I'd say, over dinner or during our evening talks on the porch. And sometimes, when people make choices like that, they leave a trail of hurt behind them. My job, your grandma Cindy's job, was to make sure that trail never reached you. Emma, ever perceptive, finally asked the question that had been weighing on all their minds. Grandpa, why didn't you just tell us before? Why didn't you let him go to jail? I looked at her, at the raw, honest pain in her eyes. Because I was still his father, Emma, and as much as he disappointed me, as much as he hurt us, there was a part of me that still loved the boy I raised. I hoped that maybe one day he would change, that he would realize his mistakes. I tried to give him a second chance, even if it cost me everything. But he squandered it. And when he came back to hurt you, to take you away, to raise a hand in Noah, that's when I knew. There were no more second chances for him. Only justice for you. It was a difficult truth, but they accepted it. They understood the depth of my sacrifice, the immense love that had driven me. And in understanding, their bond with me grew even stronger. They began, naturally and without prompting, to call me Dad, a title that still felt both foreign and utterly right. They reserved Grandpa for moments of tender reflection, acknowledging the unique journey we had shared. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Daniel, facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, had no choice but to plead guilty to multiple counts of financial fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The anonymous tips to Detective Grayson had turned into a full-blown federal investigation into his current real estate ventures, unearthing a fresh wave of corruption and illegal dealings. Alex Walker, her reputation in tatters, quickly distanced herself, though the damage to her career was already done. I didn't attend his sentencing. There was no need. His fate was sealed. The reports I read in the paper spoke of a substantial prison sentence, a ruined career, and a life utterly dismantled. No gloating, no celebration, just a quiet, weary acceptance that justice, however belated, had finally been served. Slowly, carefully, I began to reclaim aspects of my old life. The workshop, which had been primarily used for household repairs and small projects, started to buzz with activity again. I revisited my true passion, architectural restoration. There is something profoundly therapeutic about taking something old, broken, and neglected and bringing it back to life, honoring its history while strengthening its future. And this time, I wasn't alone. Jake, with his keen eye for detail, became my apprentice, learning the craft, the satisfaction of working with his hands. Emma, surprisingly, found a love for design and sketching, helping me visualize new possibilities for old spaces. Olivia and Noah, with their boundless energy, helped with demolition and material hauling, their laughter echoing through dusty old buildings. Even Sophia, with her quiet artistry, began to sketch ideas for stained glass or decorative elements. We were building again, not just houses, but our family. My identity, once fractured by Daniel's betrayal, was now whole, anchored by the love and purpose these children brought to my life. I was no longer just an old contractor. I was a patriarch, a protector, an architect of futures. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Emma approached me on the porch. She handed me a framed drawing, a beautifully rendered sketch of our house, with 5 smaller figures clustered around a larger one, all under the shade of a magnificent, sturdy oak tree. At the bottom, in her elegant script, were the words, "Our foundation, our home, our dad." A lump formed in my throat. I looked at the drawing, then at Emma, then at the rest of the kids who were now gathered, watching me with a shy, expectant hope. It wasn't a happy ending in the fairy tale sense. It was something far more real, far more profound. It was a new beginning, a testament to love, resilience, and the unwavering strength of a family forged in fire. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this foundation, this home, was built to last. This time, nothing would tear it down. The scent of sawdust and freshly cut lumber became the perfume of our new life. The old workshop, once a solitary refuge, was now often filled with the lively chatter of my grandchildren, a symphony of hammers, sanders, and youthful enthusiasm. We were knee-deep in a new project, restoring an old Victorian farmhouse on the edge of town, a building with good bones, but a century of neglect. It was more than just a job. It was a metaphor, a tangible representation of our own rebuilding. I sat on the farmhouse porch swing, covered in plaster dust, watching Jake meticulously chisel away old, cracked paint from an ornate railing. Emma, humming softly, was sketching new window designs. Olivia and Noah were arguing good-naturedly over the best way to sand down a rough beam. Sophia, always with her quiet focus, was carefully painting a small, intricate design on a salvaged wooden panel. They were thriving. They were home. The local news was playing softly on a portable radio I'd brought from home, tucked away on a dusty workbench. The reporter's voice, crisp and detached, drifted through the open windows. In a landmark decision, Daniel McKenzie, the disgraced real estate mogul, was today sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The judge, citing a pattern of egregious financial misconduct spanning decades and significant harm to both investors and vulnerable communities, made it clear that Mr. McKenzie would serve the majority of his sentence. His assets have been seized to compensate victims and cover legal expenses. His new wife, unaware of his criminal past, has filed for divorce, citing fraud and emotional distress. This brings to a close a complex investigation that began with a shocking revelation in a family court custody battle. I listened, my gaze fixed on my grandchildren, their faces alight with purpose. There was no surge of triumph, no feeling of vindication, only a profound, quiet sense of finality. It was over. The game Daniel had played for so long, the game of deception and exploitation, was finally finished. He had lost everything he thought he had, everything he'd chased with such ruthless ambition. And I had gained everything that truly mattered, everything he'd so carelessly discarded. Jake looked up from his work, catching my eye. "Grandpa," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips, "you always said a good foundation is everything. Guess Daniel learned that the hard way, huh?" I smiled back, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Indeed, son. Some lessons you just have to learn for yourself. And some foundations, some are built on sand. Others, like ours, are built to withstand anything." I thought of Cindy then, as I often did. Her wisdom, her unwavering strength, her quiet foresight. She would have been proud of the children, of the life we had forged, of the justice we had finally secured. I looked up at the vast, open sky, the sun setting in a blaze of glory. "We did it, darling," I murmured, a silent conversation with her memory. "We kept them safe, and now they know what a real family truly is." I pushed myself up from the swing, the aches and pains of an old man still there, but now imbued with a renewed purpose. I walked toward the kids, picking up a piece of sandpaper, offering to help Olivia with her beam. "You know what else is funny?" I said, my voice carrying a quiet authority that they all instinctively recognized. "Sometimes the oldest houses hide the strongest foundations. And the oldest hearts, they often hold the deepest secrets. But sometimes those secrets are just dormant blueprints, waiting for the right moment to be laid bare, to build something new, something honest, something that truly lasts." I looked at their young, vibrant faces, each one a testament to 15 years of unwavering love and sacrifice. They were my legacy, my masterpiece. And the construction, this beautiful, messy, real construction of our life, was far from over. It had only just begun.